You did.
Okay.
And it
I
works.
Thank you. I have officially, you guys have watched me hack something I never do. I had two screens running. I have another screen. That's why it was doing that. All
Ah,
right. So I have been my own IT person. I'm so amazing. So welcome to Ground Screams to Whisper. It really is a constellation of experiences. And one of the reasons that I was interested in creating a project like the Ground Screams to Whisper is because it is based in representational justice. And looking at how you can use folklore, speculative fiction, and historiography to rewrite women into often erase their erasure in stories of independence, particularly when you have statements like our founding fathers and all of that. And reflecting on settler colonialism in ways that I didn't get to name it settler colonialism until maybe last year, September. And with that, there is a big shift in the way that I look at it. And it's not because it wasn't there, it was because what we're going through in the world and around the world right now has made me find a lot of the vocabulary that was kind of pushed aside, and kind of unearth it to really look at how I want to be presenting work in the frame of what's going on in the world and how we look at the legacies of settler colonialism, not just in terms of land, but really cultural, media imperialisms, technological imperialisms. So it's quite a very fascinating journey that I've taken. And I welcome you to it. And that's why Acquiring Company, our mantra is to imagine radically. And as Alison said, as she quoted, the function of art is to do more than tell it like it is to imagine what is possible. So this is part of the imagination journey that I've taken across various platforms to create this story called The Ground Screams to Whisper as a immersive a story that uses a VR game, that uses a puzzle game, and an interactive graphic novella so that the audiences can experience the triumph of being an everyday female insurgent. And these are the ways in which this changed, because before I used to call them freedom fighters because of the language of independence and freedom fighters. But I'm also more interested in what are the everyday actions of people, and how they were actually called insurgents, how they were called, they were revolting, outside kind of the meta story of independence. And therefore, how they shaped these stories that are often erased are kind of footnotes. You find them in footnotes or endnotes, but they were very much instrumental to the Kenya that we have today, its post-colonial history, even the way the independence struggle is framed. So how I came about this was I was thinking of where I lived before. It's a former coffee plantation, and we've never had. We talk about in Kenya in terms of the history of return of the land. The first admin government kind of bought back land and stuff like that. But a lot of land has definitely not been given back to everyone. We still have issues around that. But then also looking how former spaces of colonialism, of imperialism, um, and of plantation agriculture that fed the coffers of British Empire are places that we move around and settle in very comfortably. Yet they all have a story. And so I created this character, Riziki, who uproots a tree sapling that is a veil between the land of the living and in between. And in the breaking of the worlds, she allows these three women, Nyawera, Muthoni, and Mukami, into the world of the living. And they're trapped in the in between. And she has to guide them into um, back to the land of the ancestors. And unfortunately, she also has to battle their motives because some of them have nefarious motives for being around. So one of the in every platform, so whether it's in the VR game, in the mobile puzzle game, in the interactive graphic novella, one of the key questions is can you find the way to freedom before the before the next retrograde. And freedom plays a very big part in this, because a lot of how we look at the positioning of these women and the time in which this is happening, this is at a point where um, they do not have um, access to their land. They're not able to fend for themselves. They're not able to practice their own economic activities. They're basically not able to exist as full humans. And one of the exciting parts of doing this project is the different places that we've been invited to and the conferences that we've presented at. Most recently, Playtopia, which looks at immersive and interactive arts. It's a festival in South Africa. As I've mentioned, Women Win On-Site Gaming Grant. We've received it for the past 2 years. That has allowed us to further, get into some of the research, travel to the different places that we've presented, and kind of create a runway for production. And that's something that we'll be talking about a little bit later in terms of the collaborators we have. And very much it started at Doc Leipzig and Artisan in 2021 as a thought, an idea. So we're really excited to be here a couple years later and still working on this. So I just wanted to share with you at the beginning, you can find the work, our work, or any work that Akoya is doing or La Parole Noire Immersive is doing at akoya.africa. As I said, our mantra is imagine radically. And this is just one moment of introduction as we go along. But first, I'm going to welcome, if I may pick, Linda. Is it okay for you to read the third quotation? Is that okay? If not, Linda Nganga, could you read us the third quotation?
Yes, absolutely. That's the one by Reed Danahay, Pratt.
Yes.
Okay. Modes of resistance to dominant discourses, a text in which people undertake to describe themselves in ways that engage with representations others have made of them. Texts or works of art that are auto-ethnographic assert alternative forms of meaning and power.
Thank you, Nganga. Thank you so much. The reason why I start and I kind of frame this, you see all the different frames I pull from. I pull from autoethnography, I pull from African gender studies, I pull from critical fabulation. And the reason is that as Africans, whatever cultural ethnic group you are, that has gone through the ravages of settler colonialism or anything that has been um, a result of Age of Discovery that was signed by the Pope and allowed for Christians and white Christians to apparently annex and use all land and get rid of all the non-Christians and natives. We have a way that our stories have been erased in different ways. We have ways in which the dominant discourses, the stories, the narratives that kind of circulate around the world are not told by us, or even aside from just being told by us, there's a certain level at times, if you note, of criticality that doesn't engage with this. And for me, I felt that in writing, I was working against dominant discourses, particularly if I was looking at history. So in the placement where I was as a, social, cultural writer, commentator, someone who looks as writing as a revolutionary act, where does that put us? Where do we get to draw from that? So part of this work is an elaboration on what we call autoethnography. And it really looks at how we can have not just alternative meanings, but in ways that decenter the dominant discourses. So as we'll go along, I'll show you how in many ways the project attempts in much as address, but also delink from these types of legacies. So some of our foundational questions moving forward with the project, my foundational question is, how do you write yourself into history and invent versions, right? How do we as non-represented groups perform historiography, which is how do we analyze and create new histories, as well as analyze the history that we already have at hand through the different lenses that we have access to. And then through all these questions, a very important part is, how is it possible using multi-platform, transmedia, new media, whatever you want to call it, XR, whatever part of the world you're in, to illuminate different perspectives in history? Because one very important thing is, I'm not trying to, in creating this type of work, I am being creative. I am not trying to come up with an authentic history and actually keep away from the ideas of authenticity, but really create layers and ways that we're able to reinterrogate and re-enter different historical worlds, different fabulations, different ways that we get excited about the work, even when there's so many silences and elisions in the archives that we have access to, as well as just our own knowledge. So getting on with this obviously is a gargantuan task for myself. Therefore, I usually work with collaborators, and it's very exciting just to mention them right now. And a little bit later, you will have a moment, they'll introduce themselves. So as a research lead, because this project is very much, the Ground Screams to Whisper is very much looking at how we can use research and create new work. So really research creation work. And the African Digital Heritage is here as a research lead for us to access multiple ways of encountering the work, as well as have this set in some frame of veracity, as well as, if we're going to be creating, how do we know this is at the point we're creating and this is at the point that it was historical, and how we engage with that as producers of cultural work. Fallow Hide is there as a VR partner to build out the VR game. Leti Arts is an organization is based in Ghana. African Digital Heritage and Fallow Hide are based in Nairobi, Kenya. Leti Arts is in Accra, Ghana, and has actually some offices in Nairobi. And Leti Arts is there to support in the interactive graphic novella, as well as the mobile puzzle game. And lastly, one of the biggest clues I feel for our work is that we're going to be partnering with the African Astronomical Society, that will introduce us to a lot of the different stories and constellations, and really our cultural heritage that we didn't know we had access to, or we didn't know even existed when we looked at the sky. And also we have Javier Acosta. He's a head artistic director, and then myself, executive producing the work between Nairobi and Montreal. And now one important part is, we go through looking at producing and production in very authoritative author ways. The author, the director, they have this singular vision, and it kind of is the violence of the auteur. So one of the things that was very excited about creating is working from the point of what we refer as collective wisdom, where in this type of work, which is representational justice, how are we using media for equity and justice? How are different people coming into the space, and different competencies and professionals coming into the space to drive a co-creation that goes beyond one singular person? And that's something also at the building of this project was important for me. And this is where, as the quote states, collective wisdom goes further. It's very important. We call it collaboration, but in this book, Collective Wisdom by Katerina Sisek and William Urikyo, they really went around actually people who were creating in XR, really using digital technologies to create work, to understand the deeply collaborative process that goes into it. So collective wisdom goes further. With conceptual explanation and practical example, this book, Collective Wisdom, Co-Creating Media for Equity and Justice, shows that co-creation only becomes wise when it is grounded in equity and justice. And that is also one of the operating ways that we work. And so our first interlude is taking a moment for you to meet the collaborators in art, in research art, the mobile puzzle game, and virtual reality game. So I'd like to start with Chao T. Minor. of African digital heritage. If you just introduce African digital heritage to everyone, and particularly in reference to this project. Or is Mutano going to do it?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, sorry, my network isn't the best.
All right.
So let me just try and see if I can switch. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Chao Tayana Maina. I'm the founder of African Digital Heritage. As mentioned briefly in my introduction, ADH as an organization exists to really ask the question, what is the place of technology within African heritage? How is it used? What does it enable? What does it silence? Who does it enable? Who does it silence? And finally, what are the possibilities and imaginations that are opened up when we use technology as a foundation of how we interact with history, heritage, culture, and all the various forms in which it takes and embodies. On this particular project, African Digital Heritage is leading the research work and is really looking at what is a place of grounding ourselves within the history of this period, but also questioning the history as it is written in kind of like dominant spaces and canons. What are the gaps within this history? And how do these gaps then enable us to answer and prod and critique and dialogue with history in very interesting ways? Research is foundational to the work that we do, both from a historical perspective, but in also understanding technology as a tool, which means that in and of itself, the technology does not make the decisions. It is we, the people who are working with the technology, who do. I will let the ADH team introduce themselves. On call, we have Mutano, who is our head of programs, and we also have Muthoni Mwangi, who is our research associate and has been primarily working on the foundational research for this experience over the past 3 months or so. So I will let each of them maybe speak to their specific roles and what that has been like. Thank you.
Thank you, Chao.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mutanu. As Chao mentioned, I'm the head of programs and outreach at African Digital Heritage. For this project, I was basically helping in the research and trying to think through what are some of the gaps that we might be missing, what are some of the things that we might have overlooked or have been overlooked, even with histories, and then how can we use play and also use tech in a way that is engaging, but also in a way that is helping audiences to interact with this and to help them learn. So I will let Muthoni take you through what the research process was and what some of the various learnings that informed this next phase of this project. So karibu Muthoni.
Okay, hello everyone. As I mentioned before, my name is Muthoni Mwangi, and I am a research associate at African Digital Heritage. I am a multidisciplinary curator. I work at the intersection of African philosophy. My research approach is mostly experimental, and it's grounded in the spirit of community care. My practice is a self-reflective process which involves co-dreaming, dream weaving, and wake work through imagining and building freer futures for Indigenous people. Also, a lot of reclaiming and remembering our individual and collective histories. In my free time, I am also an artist, as a maker and a poet. So, I mean, from my introduction, naturally, the Ground Screams to Whisper is a project. It drew me in. So I'm interested in curating a research basis for the grants can be used for all the other collaborators of this project and anyone else who interacts with the ground screams research for the world building process. And so this process is a long-term and nonlinear process that will involve weaving storytelling with other research methods outside the Western Academy. I'm interested in uncovering Indigenous memories about gender, queerness, and freedom for myself and anyone else who would interact with the GSTW work and the GSTW world as a whole. So far, with regards to the project, we have created a research design that breaks down our methodology, our ethos as the GSTW team, and the research direction and methods, as Nyambura has mentioned before. Autoethnography is a big part of our process, and critical fabulation, understanding the biases that exist in historical narratives. So far we have, which has visual and textual references for the rest of the team to begin imagining and playing with. There's 2 more research packets to go based on the themes. This particular research packet was around Kikuyu epistemologies, because again, most of the characters are actually from the Agikuyu of Kenya. So the next step for us will look like incorporating other sources of research material, like archival footage, interviews. Yeah, so information dumps, but also include self-reflective work within there, like a forward that kind of contextualizes the research for everyone in the team to have an honest encounter with the work, an encounter where you can connect, even though this is not maybe you're not directly related to the tribes, some contextualization, and yeah, I think that's where we are so far. The second research packet will be around Indigenous sexualities and gender identities. Yeah, personally, I am really excited to be part of this project. So far, one of the things that that was absolutely jarring is encountering the silence in the archive. And I think with that, it grounded me in the importance of this work that we're doing, this work that we're doing, because something needs to fill that silence. Something needs to fill that silence, and there needs to be stories for the babies, stories for the children, and even stories for us. So I'm excited to be part of the project, and I can't wait to see the different ways it evolves, and the different things that we uncover. Yeah, that's
Thank you, Muthoni. Thank you, ADH. Thank you, Mutano and Chow. As you can see, this is a deeply research-based project. And for us, the research is key. It's a foundation to everything else that is built on this. And that's when we come to the art direction department. And that's Javier Acosta, who you met just earlier. He's an overall art director. He had to leave. But there's also our stories, like Javier and I met like 10 years ago when I was primarily in film and television. So my career spanned the different artistic disciplines. So I feel very excited to be presenting this type of project that touches on the different artistic disciplines that I've actually created or produced in. And so he has actually won most recently an award at the Bogota Biennale. And so we're really excited to have him as part of the kind of head art director. He's also joined by Sasha Vreka, who is working out of Montreal, Canada. And Sasha is working on the art direction that is specifically geared towards the VR game. And there are differences because of also how the characters move within these spaces that are very different. For example, if we have them in an interactive novel or puzzle game. So the different competencies and different as well as different skill sets that are necessary for this. And that's why this is such a deeply collaborative project. We really can't move without each other. So I'd like to introduce Kojo, who's from Leti Arts, and they are the organizational collaborator that are working on the puzzle game and the interactive graphic novella. Yeah, go ahead, Kojo, and tell us more about Leti Arts and their involvement.
Hi. All right. So for Leti Arts, we are a gaming company and also a comic production company. We produce comics, we produce mobile app games. There are a few games that we built in-house. Games like Hamza Run, Puzzle Scout, Shokri, Africa's Legends, My Jolly, Mama Tingi project, Uri, Sifa. So with Let's Art, with the art aspect, and I leading the group or team. For this project, we were tasked to produce an 8-page graphic novel as an introductory. I don't know if Nyambura will allow me to share my work.
Oh, we'll show the work. It's part of the presentation.
Sure. Okay. All right. So with my team, I have Robertson, who is the lead developer here, so he can also talk about his area of expertise. Robertson.
Yes, hello.
Yeah.
Hey, Robertson.
Yeah, hello everyone. Okay, so I think Kojo has done a good job talking about us and what we do. Right, so we do games and comics as well as animations, and our main focus as a company also has to do with storytelling. So I find it interesting that we are working on something like this. So our vision as a company is to sort of retell African stories in more rich and more engaging manners, right? And for me, being the lead game developer here in Let's say I've been here for I think the past 3 years now, and we've had a chance to create very cool projects. I think there'll be a time for presentation. So when that time comes, I would definitely show you a thing or two. But yes, that's about it from our side. Again, we are very glad to be here.
Thank you, Robertson. And Robertson, we worked on the puzzle game that I'll show. It's just a draft of it, but it's really exciting to be working with African talent in games across, around Africa. And so we went to Ghana and now we're back in Nairobi. I'd like to welcome Walid Kilonzi of Fallowhide to just talk about the VR game and Fallowhide and their entry into the ground scripts to Whisper.
Great. So I'm going to show my face for like 2 seconds. Then I'm going to switch it off because of my, what do you call this, network. Then I'll, yeah, just use the voice thingy. Great. So my name is Walid Kilonzi. I'm an extended reality producer at Followhide. And at Followhide, we create original African realities that are true to the African people and their labors. And primarily what that means is that we try to assist companies, businesses, and governments to, first of all, on the business end, to create communication solutions are centered around extended reality, and with different organizations to create narrative experiences that are grounded on the African continent. So, our primary role, especially with the Ground Scrims to Whisper, is to partner in the XR development, which is extremely exciting. So we'll be contributing to the immersive and the cutting edge experience envisioned for the virtual reality game. And we are extremely excited. And why we believe we wanted to join Nyambura in this vision and Acquire & Co. is we believe it'll have quite an interesting impact on African narratives, especially since our main interest is extended reality. The originality and the powerful themes has the potential to make it one of the most consequential pieces in the continent and beyond. And also, of course, Acquire's and Followhide's values match perfectly, making collaboration and doing business together quite a natural and easy decision to make. Yeah, I think that's primarily it. Of course, you can catch us on our website, Followhide.Africa, and also on our socials. Yes.
Thank you so much, Walid. Thank you to the collaborators. It's really important for me to really show the different people who have been a part of this. So the story that launched the Ground Scrims to Whisper was actually African Feminist Forum, where I read about how Kikuyu women were involved in what was considered the Thuku revolt that I'll get into just a little bit. But the one thing was what that article talked about was the fact that most colonial literature had caricatures of what it was for African women in their involvement. And usually it was either through sex work or they were just ignorant peasants. And it's very important to note that African women, and particularly within this story and this settler colonial encounter, where the development of the founding and the settling of what they called White Highlands meant the displacement of a tribe of people, of cultural groupings, of various clans out of their homeland. And they tried to paint it as something that, these people were ignorant, they didn't know anything. And more importantly, the forced labor that came later as a result of it was also based on the knowledge that the women had as pertains to agriculture, and therefore really enriching the coffers of British Empire. So it was very interesting because Kikuyu women, and particularly in the discussion of founding fathers, the founding fathers from different cultural ethnic groups in Kenya. So let us be very clear about that. My concentration is on Kikuyu women based on the area. I believe this type of project will also get other people from other cultural groups to either respond to this or contribute to this type of projects, where we start to learn of different ways that people revolted against the British colonial empire and imperialism, truly. So Thuku was considered one of the founding fathers, but there is a note about Thuku, is that he actually gained from the support of the women because of his vocal opposition to government hat and poll tax, a reduction in African wages, oppression by the tribal police, and forced labor of women and children especially. And this is why the women lent their support to Thuku. And they, from the money that they made, or they were able to have through the meager wages that they had, they actually financed part of his campaigns wherever he went. So whereas these women, again, they were ignorant peasants, or at least in dominant discourses, or, you know, they were workers. They were actually quite integral to the independence struggle and the ability of the men to move around and pay for the way as they went to agitate for rights. So that was a very interesting article that then launched me into a deeper discussion around gender. And the three women in Africa, and this is a moment of delinking. We usually look at gender studies and women's studies and feminist studies, typically from a Western lens, a white Western lens, and then we kind of, as maybe Africans or people who are non-white and non-Western, are then in many ways forced to either come up with, and this is what, you know, have to link up into spaces, epistemological, ontological, philosophical spaces that are not in congruence with what the people from different cultures could have. And this is a work of Ife Amadiome, Oyeronke Oyomi, and Manya Lazreg. They're very important because with Ife Amadiome, and she actually presents, talks about gender and sex in Africa from a perspective of how are we looking at the affective relationships that aren't linked to necessarily understanding women as female bodies first. And that's why her groundbreaking book, Male Daughters and Female Husbands, really caused a stir in the sociological spaces, because it really went against what Western sociology was. And Western sociology, which was termed as, you know, capital sociology, really did not reflect on different ways of being. And this is why Oyeronke Oyome talks about the invention of women too, where she discusses the notion of biologic that is within Western gender discourses, where it says if you're female, you're essentially a woman. Yet she shows the ways in which that does not work. And Ife and Oyeronke, if I may call them that, really worked in Yoruba and Igbo cultures. And then Manya Lazreg, who is an Algerian feminist, a great understanding around also women and land and access to land, particularly as it leads to the Algerian Revolution. So these were very important texts that came up in terms of framing how the understanding of the type of characters that I was building, the type of world I was building that informed the world building, the character traits, and also even thinking about how we're using the technology to tell this story. So this is one of the quotes that I love from Ife Amadiome, and it really is about how inventions in one form of epistemology that becomes a dominant discourse, and also a dominant discourse of colonialism and oppression, actually does not serve another culture. And she talks about, we already have a history and a legacy of women's culture, a matriarchy based on affective relationships. And this shows, and this should be given a central place in analysis and social inquiry. And these are the ways in which I work to kind of look at, in creating the stories that we do, in situating the cultures that we do, how do we delink and figure out ways to unearth and tell richer stories and more relevant stories to us. So we look at the historical excavations and archive making as we're looking through the stories, and that's something that, as Muthoni Mwangi talked about, the different ways that we have kind of thought about who owned the land, who tilled the land, who had access to the land. And what's really interesting about this out of focus map, that this is a colonial map from a time when Karen Blixen still owned Karen. And this is where I used to live before. Now it has definitely much more developed. It's not based on plantations, but that was one of the stories that I was looking at and saying, who actually tilled this land? In this discussion of forced labor, it is the making of the East African concentration camp. And therefore, how did it shift the different relationships that the gendered relationships, relationships to breaking and ruptures of cosmology, kinship, all this that are very important in understanding. We'll say we can start with the notion, the rupture of society, and then its rebuilding. But I'm very much interested in, with the story, as you'll see, is how do these women create their own joy and freedom? And as you can see, this is another aspect that we look at, is how the colonial media actually addressed the revolts. They're always called riots. They're always about the mob attacks of the loyal chief, and really creating a narrative of this unruly African somewhere. But the truth is that they weren't unruly, they wanted their land back. When we look at the land back discussion within Kenya, one of the things that I always underline is that it often erases the women who participated in agitating for the land back, who are disenfranchised, who are illiterate. And the reason they were illiterate is because of how education was also gendered within British colonialism. And that meant that it was the men who were educated and not the women. And also that meant that it disrupted the ownership of land, where in the Agikuyu culture, the women were the custodians of land. And so, yes, they were then forced to labor the land, but then the very land that they owned, technically, as you look for it from a cultural perspective, is then taken away and then given to men. So thinking through about all these types of ruptures that inform how we look at in telling the story. And this second interlude is looking at synthesis. How do we pass through all this really complex and layered, and as Muthoni says, and as we talk about all of this with African digital heritage, the silences, the gaps, the emotional labor that goes into ending up in dead ends on so many different levels, and really entering sometimes an existential artistic crisis, for me at least, is I go back to Uche Okeke's work. And Uche Okeke is very important because Uche Okeke leads Zaria Collective. And this is in the 60s, where he talks about how African art becomes a place of synthesis of the old and the new, and also creating our version of art for its own sake. So this interlude, I'd like for you, as we move into how all this was synthesized, knowing that our forefather, Uche Okeke, as well as his wife, did think about this and published severally, and that's how the Zaria Collective came out. And they actually worked deeply against the entrenchment of just Western modern art as art in different Nigerian schools at that time. So we synthesize these stories into looking at land and lineage. And one of the most important things is, I think we pass in Kenya, we pass a lot of the plantations, not understanding, but really contemplating in the ways in which looking at this ripening berries, having a cup of coffee, what actually brought it here? How many lives were forced into some form of bondage? How many people were lost to this? And that's why the title for this is The Ground Screams to Whisper. And in it, using really Gothic storytelling motifs in deciding, because it is the horror of forced relocation into the different concentration camps that British euphemism came up with, notion of colonial villages. But when you really understand what happened there, it is horrifying, it is terrifying. So how do we start to look through different ways that we can tell the story using these different motifs of the mist, of abandoned spaces? So I'm really excited about how in telling this awful stories, we can experience some sense of deep artistry, deep joy, and freedom in the ways that we create the characters and what their work becomes. And that's why I'm also centering it in Eastern and Southern African cosmologies, because it is a conversation around the land and the sky, because the sky was how they also told time. And it is important because one of the interesting things is that, for example, when you look at this constellation, I asked at the beginning, can anyone tell me of a constellation in an African language? And this constellation, which has, okay, it's Orion, right? And then this Pleiades there, actually has a story, and it has a story from the Namakwa community, where Pleiades were the daughters of the sky god, and you can see them to the right there. So the daughters of the sky god. Their husband, Aldebaran, shot his arrow, and that is Orion's sword, as you can see, at 3 zebras, and that formed the Orion's belt. It fell short. He dared not return home because he had killed no game, and he dared not retrieve his arrow because of the fierce lion, Betelgeuse, which is one of a very brilliant star. It shows up when Orion, when it shows up in fullness in the sky. Betelgeuse is a very brilliant star. And for the Namakwas, it was a fierce lion, which sat watching the zebras. There he sits still, shivering in the cold night and suffering thirst and hunger. I doubt any of us, at least on the African continent, have maybe heard of Namakwa's story. You might have heard of others in your culture, and this would be really great if anyone could let us know what they know. But this was a really interesting moment, and that's why organizations like the African Astronomical Society become so key in helping us tell this story. So the different visual aesthetics that I'm interested in using, particularly magic realism, the different animations, particularly for the animated VR, and really looking at how muted colors and vibrant notes can work together. Because, I don't know how many you have read, looked at how Africa tends to be represented, and we're always some hot orange savanna. And we're more than that. So I'd like to introduce you to the characters and introduce you to the wonderful art that has been put together by Kojo, by Javier and Sasha. So one of our characters, our main character, is called Riziki, and she's a healer. She represents the present, making links with the past. And this is just quite interesting type of ways that the artists have thought through the characters. We have Mkami, who's a shapeshifter representing wisdom, and when we're doing the research, we're coming up with different ways that we're finding about rites and rituals, and Mukami becomes a container for that. We have Nyambura, the Reaper. She marks a moment, she's our character that marks a moment that of cultural upheaval, but more importantly, a very keen rupture in Kikuyu society where the very notion of a Kikuyu woman is tested for her, and we go through her story. And then finally have Muthoni, who is the generation that is born and grows up only knowing colonial occupation, and she revolts against it, and that's part of her story. And as you can see, this is different art from Sasha, Kojo, and Javier. And also I've picked it off some parts of the internet just to give you an idea of the type of characters and the influences and thoughts around creating them. And finally, we have Gary. We always need a good villain in a story. And one thing about Gare is, so in Kikuyu, Gare means leopard. Anybody who it means otherwise, please let me know, because I've followed with leopard. And Gare is the ogre. And he's also called Gary to his former owner of the land. And the appearance of ogres in Kikuyu folktales and therefore cosmology is also the dealing with kind of curses. You're looking at the dealing with horrors. So the ogre becomes a very important storytelling device. And here is our Gare, and he is cursed beyond redemption. He can neither die and cross into the land of the ancestors, and he is forever tied to the farm where the owner used to live. And so one of the storylines is just understanding how Gare got into that. And with the different with the different the VR game, the interactive novella, and the mobile puzzle game, the different ways that we enter different aspects of the story. Because in one technology, at least the way I was looking at it, cannot tell the full story, but we have so much research that we can use in different ways and explore deeper. And that's why I was very interested in creating this different worlds of experience that we get to travel through through the different creative choices in terms of the platforms. And the worlds of experience, we have the world of the living, which is a cottage, and I was really looking at creating somewhere desolate. There's a world of the ancestors, which kind of merges the astronomical world and the earth, but it is really the in-between worlds, the in-between world. And this is where Nyambura, Muthoni, and Mukami are trapped, and Riziki raptures the veil by uprooting an olive tree. And an olive tree is very important to Kikuyu culture. And so far with the research we've done, the olive tree is also related to the female gender, to women. And also looking at women as holders of different types of knowledge, because in Kikuyu society, there's an overarching patriarchy. There's also a matrifocal aspect to it that we will break down in the different ways that the relationship work out. And also within Kikuyu culture, one thing that doesn't get spoken about, and that's part of the legacy of settler colonialism and religion, is the queer aspect of it and the different rites and rituals that allow for gender fluidity. So this olive tree in the research became a very important aspect of how she raptures the veil and releases this women who torture her inevitably as they want to, some want to cross over, others don't. So what will Riziki do? And this is the land of the ancestors. As I said, more often than not, we're told about Africa. We all imagine Africa, okay, not us, but not as Africans, but also the images that we are fed, that's deeply savannah, apparently. But with Kikuyu culture, it is a highland culture, mountains, and it exists, we have tropical glaciers. So one of the very interesting things is if we prayed, as Kikuyus, they prayed to Ngai who was in the mountain, and the mountains were snow-capped and they could see them, why is it that we cannot imagine a heaven that is a mix of snow and vegetation, and like, why can't we imagine that for ourselves? So that's also something I'm exploring in notions of critical fabulation and just kind of thinking speculatively. So this is our third interlude, and it's a very important interlude. I just want to take a moment, just 2 seconds, because we've gone through, kind of the theoretical underpinnings within the humanities and all of that. We've gone through the historical background of this and how we've synthesized it across in different ways. But this is the moment in which kind of the tech becomes more present. So Walid, I would like for you don't need to turn on the camera, to read this third interlude to also center us in terms of understanding the notions of technology and storytelling and all of that.
I think it's a disservice to designers and technologies to be solution-driven rather than by people and culture. Solutionism is a myth. In the everyday, people work from a different place of abundance to build systems that serve themselves and others. Salome Asega quoted in Deem Journal. Yes.
Thank you. And yes, thank you very much. And this is really about technology and liberation that works not in the ways that we're being told nowadays with the Elon Musk's of the world and the craze that is AI. So it's very important that even as we look at different ways that these technologies are interesting and open up spaces for us to present, and I love what Melissa Lela talked about, the way African oral literature was waiting for XR so that we can tell the stories in the cadence that we're used to, in the non-linear fashions that we do speak. And for me, one of the extensions is imagine the fire, the village fire, and also it being done in the round, which is why also VR is quite interesting for me. So thank you very much, Walid. So as I talked about the experience and the different platforms that it is, so I'm going to just take you through. It's going to be a fast run, but I just want to recognize everybody. This is so deeply brought by the different collaborators that it can exist in the forms that it does. So we'll start with the VR game. The mechanics are that you'll pick a character, and with the character, you will go through selecting different objects in the world to complete the story that will allow them to move on into the world of the ancestors. And if you don't, so the whole idea is an adventure game, picking up different clues as you learn about this world, and you cross over into the world of the ancestors or not, which makes you return back to the different, you return back and you have to complete the game. So the idea is to see in ways that we can have the different worlds interact with each other as you go from one world to the next. So that is with the VR game. The puzzle game, I'm just going to show it to you here. And what's really important is the puzzle game is meant to function as a way for a younger audience that can play and put together different constellations. And in putting these different constellations together, unlock a story from an African perspective about the different the meaning of the constellation, the different aspects of the constellation, what country it comes from, and country and or culture. So this is just a very rough draft of what it looks like. And as you can see, you get the name of the constellation, and then you tap to get to the next puzzle. And with the graphic novella, very much like to have a shout out to Kojo. We've been working together on this most recently, and in different many ways. He's put one of the story, which is the meeting of Mugare and Mokami, who are actually, they'll be locked in a power struggle for Riziki's life. So these are the type of panels that he created, and the art. And we're really excited to be working with Letty Arts in creating the graphic novella, the mobile puzzle game. Robertson, thank you very much. You did it really fast and really well. And Pleiades, remember we talked about what is the name? They're the digging stars to a lot of Eastern and Southern African cultures. And they're also the Pleiades also refers to, in Xhosa, it's Isilimela. So it's really interesting how we can use these different stories that we know to really interrogate our cosmos in our own cultural references and language. So this interlude I will read because we've come to the end of this. I am excited about using new technologies and XR and all of those things. However, one of the first things that I thought about when I was looking at the work, I've mentioned the word critical fabulation very many times, is Saidiya Hartman's work, and actually her essay on critical fabulation. And this quote kind of encapsulates where I'm coming from as a creator, where we're looking at representational justice, equity, and social inquiry, is that I want to topple the hierarchies and determine how we know things. I want to topple the hierarchies that determine how we know things and who people are in the world. And so I was thinking about the relationship between history and the violence of the archive, as well as its fiction and its elasticity. And that's really important when you think through how do we delink from legacies of settler colonialism when we're looking at storytelling and technologies that are just so rooted in cultural and media imperialisms. How do you think of African cultural text making and remove African, insert any other culture that is non-Western and non-white? What are the historical excavations that you're making the collaborative processes? Who do you bring into this type of work? So as I wrap up, it's not an epilogue, it's not a conclusion. It's what I call a prelude to the next. And I'm going to read. Up to this point, and before the next departure, in the critical approaches to histories, cultures, technologies, the Ground Screams to Whisper is a complex tale of discussing, unpacking, and upping, problematizing legacies of settler colonialism. And as a systems, or at a systems and structural level, it is an investigation of how those whose stories have been told by others choose to tell stories about themselves and across mediums, thereby addressing the legacies of cultural imperialisms baked into our everyday lives. And this cultural imperialisms also come with media imperialisms, because how we're looking also at the technologies and the very networks that we receive these stories about ourselves and from dominant structures. And also how in harnessing digital technologies, which allow for wider dissemination and audience engagement, which is great. Other important and necessary questions emerge around how these technologies are powered, the raw materials that make them, where these raw materials are extracted from, whose labor is exploited, whose body is disposed, whose life does not matter, and what economic and environmental injustices are committed for us to even participate in this very visual encounter. You know, what powers your machines? What powers that lithium battery? And in participating in this virtual encounter, who has access and who does not? Whose labor is exploited for this access? And just because internet access feels or seems ubiquitous, there are still important digital rights and labor questions at hand. How do we, in our digital humanities work, therefore, reflect on, address, problematize digital equity and freedom for all? To quote Hazel B. Biana, citing bell hooks in her 2020 Extending Bell Hooks Feminist Theory in the Journal of International Women's Studies, oppressions are multi-layered and they're embodied by sexism, racism, class elitism, and imperialism. Consequently, all these are interrelated and inseparably connected to each other. So in this liberatory tale, speculative fiction that is a Ground Screams to Whisper, which contends with legacies of settler colonialism, with labor and extraction of resources at its center, I recognize that we will be truly free when we are all free. A free Palestine, a free Sudan, a free Congo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nyambura. That was incredible. And I definitely feel challenged, especially with the constellations. I think I need to know more about that in terms of from my own culture and from my own tribes and where I come from. So now, yes. So now it's open to Q&A. If you have any questions for Nyambura or anyone in the team, you can go ahead and either type in the chat or raise your hand so that we can have a little bit more order. But yeah, if Nganga, you have anything to say as people get their questions ready.
As folks gather their thoughts. Yeah. Mark, I see your message. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, see you next time round. I did have one question. Sorry, I was just confirming that Modoni is still on the call, because my question is for you, Modoni, and Nyambura by extension. I'm curious about the question of authorship in the sense of the research packets that ADH is providing for the kind of background research. How do those feature? Do those need to be cited in any way, shape, or form in any of the different variations of the experiences? So I'm curious about that. but I'm also curious how the constellation of experiences is pushing back against, and you talked about this a little bit, right, in the sense of collective wisdom, but the story's there. There is a story out there, and one or two or three individuals are laying claim to it. How do you push back against that while also acknowledging, right, ethically and equitably, any labor that has been done to create, document, hold the story? That may be more of a comment than a question, but if it sparks anything, Nyambura Muthoni, please share, or somebody else on the team.
ADH, do you want to jump in before? I'd like a breather.
Oh, no, I was thinking you could go ahead. And I think what I have to say in response is actually thank you for that question comment, because I think personally we hadn't thought about it as a team or gotten to the point of deciding the question on authorship, the question on where the research features. I've also seen in the chat that Valiant has asked whether the public could get to experience the research packets. I think that's also an important point for us to consider on the whole. Yeah, but I think that's all I have to say, Nyambura.
Great question, great comment, because so a couple layers are happening. One of them is that the research packets are where we kind of have all the citations. Imagine this work as this great grand paper, or what do you call it? Is it called a monograph in the circles, Nana? What is it? So a book for all of us who buy them that comes with citations. What was important is for what would happen is the research packs books exist with the citations, and the work will always have access to them, so that when you see the work, you can reference. And then also understanding that this is a creative work, and this is what was important, and this is something that we capture in a podcast that is coming to you guys soon, is the leaps that we're making between this is the research we found, and then out of having all this is a story we have made. And those are very two different things. And then also looking at, for example, I've read you a story that is collected by the African Astronomical Society. So one of the stories that was collected. And these exist free because they were the people from whom this story was not taken, but has been put in custodianship for us to know about. The idea is if anything is made that from the direct story itself, like if the research packs are starting to be sold, then they would have to be remunerated for it too. So we're also coming up in ways that how does African Astronomical Society, that is a holder and a custodian of these stories, get to be paid back for that labor, not their labor, but the work in itself sitting, and what does that look like? And I think it's something that we're making along as we're going along, because this type of reparation or really giving back to the communities, particularly in this type of work where a lot of the folklore has been technically extracted, has not been done. So one of the things is we're looking to see how that remuneration can happen and what the container for that is. The research packets were meant to be available to everyone. And a big part of it, and this is why we're working with African Digital Heritage, is to have a research partner, an institution that can be a holder of that. Like us moving on and continuing to work with that work, yes, but there's research that we found, the things that we found that belong to the world, not us. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they're not the research that we put out into the the research that was done for this does not belong to us. It is there for people to have access to. And that's why it's important to partner with this type of institutions. And then I say, Lillian, are there key gaps in the research that perhaps the team may not have covered, but others could pick up? At the end of the project, most definitely, there will always be gaps. And none of this is exhaustive in the sense that I'm not trying to come up with one story in the research. It is definitely for others to pick up and to problematize and create ways in which that they respond to it, either respond by saying, this is what happens in my community, or add to it. It's the different ways that that can be done.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you for your questions. I don't know if anyone else has another question. Maybe I can ask a question in regards to maybe the game or the extended reality and the novel. Are you planning on distributing these in different languages, or is it just in English?
Great question. Primarily English for now, but looking to have translations, particularly, yeah, I mean, publishing wise, also looking to see what those translations look like and in which territories. So it would make no sense in terms of, how would you call it? Having it only in English. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that is definitely something that I'm interested in and seeing what that looks like.
Okay, I can see also Angela has a similar question, where she was asking what are storytelling ideals linguistically. So yeah, I guess I wasn't the only one asking. Okay, I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. You can ask even the other team members